In 2011, I actually joined a meetup just on meetup.com that was based around Tucson electronic music. And the very first meetup in that group was just a sort of gathering at Sky Bar off 4th Avenue. And it was just a few people that wanted to get together and talk about what they could do to do something new for the electronic music scene, not specific to any certain genre. There were people that were big into house, techno, disco, but also psytrance and drum and bass. And I met two really key people at that first meetup who would go on to become some of my best friends and partners in different projects, and that was Gustav Kahn and Stephen Thomas. And together the three of us decided to form a community organization called JAM, or Just Add Music Events. And directly as a result of that, we started throwing a biannual, twice a year, free potluck, dance party, picnic event in Reed Park that we called the Electric Picnic. And that was sort of the first real experience that I had directly with contributing to the music scene, the dance music scene in Tucson. And at that time, it was really, let's see, there was a Saturday night party called Bang Bang that a DJ named Matt McCoy, who still lives in Tucson, I believe it was his night, and it kind of catered more towards new disco and indie dance with some house music. And that was a pretty popular style at that time. A lot of synths, a lot of 80s sounds, you know, a lot of college crowd would go there because, you know, 80s music is kind of always cool among college kids and to a certain extent, so that was sort of an updated version of that. So that was a pretty good party. There were events around downtown as well. I think Playground was just starting to get rolling around that time, so they had some parties on the rooftop there, as they still do. There was always smaller events happening that were just kind of renegade or warehouse style or just house parties. I'm not really aware of too many, oh, I take that back. Actually, there was a free weekly event at Delectables called After Dark at Delectables, and it was just out on the patio, basically outside at Delectables. A woman named Sandra Turner, who goes by DJ Electrotech, was one of the key people behind that. And that was really fun. It was just kind of a block party feel. It was just speakers and DJ gear set up right there off 4th, so you could hear it for blocks, you know, and people would come in and out. That was always fun. So I really came from the rock and roll side of things. I grew up being heavily influenced by what my parents listened to, which was a mix of, you know, 60s, 70s rock and roll and 80s pop with a lot of Latin music mixed in too. So that was sort of my musical foundation. And when I was younger, before I moved to Tucson, I was mainly a guitar player and piano player and played in different rock bands in Dallas, where I went to school, and in Louisiana, where I grew up. So moving here, I really was craving a musical outlet, which is part of what brought me to seek out that meetup group and look for other people that were musical. But making electronic music was really appealing because since I didn't know anyone at first when I moved to Tucson, that was something I can do, you know, at home with some of the equipment I already had. I'm pretty inclined towards computers and technology, so that was a big appeal to me too, just the electronic production side of it. And the particular style that I was drawn to was more of the new disco and indie dance side, which was very closely related to indie rock. A lot of indie dance producers and new disco producers were doing remixes of indie bands that were in that disco kind of style. So that was my initial connection because I was into a lot of those indie bands. And so I'd get an album or listen to an EP, and there would be a couple of remixes on there, and I would, you know, get pretty into that and think that was cool and start to investigate these producers and DJs, and that brought me into the electronic music world a little more deeply. And sort of from there, new disco led to house and deep house, and a few years later ended up going to the Movement Festival in Detroit, and that was sort of my techno pilgrimage and my big techno education there. And from that point, I've been, you know, a big fan of all those styles. Yeah, so really that's my main involvement in the electronic music scene in Tucson currently through KXCI Community Radio, which is a purely community-based radio station on FM radio and online. And so I'm part of the show Electric Feel, where we have a show every Friday night from 8 to 10 o'clock. And it's all aspects of electronic music, not only four on the floor dance, club music, but also ambient music, anything that has an electronic feel to it. So I've been involved with that since 2015. Hold on, is that right? That is, yeah. Yeah, I've been a member of that since the fall of 2015. I was invited by the two founding members, Corbin Dooley and Toby Roberts, and I had grown to know them as I was involved in the scene for the last few years before that. And it's wonderful because it gives me constant motivation to seek out new music, to try to find something new that's worth sharing with the community. A lot of our listeners are actually not necessarily big house heads or techno heads. They're just people in the community. And a lot of them still listen to that show and give us a lot of feedback, and that they enjoy being exposed to that style of music. So that's always kind of something that I appreciate having the opportunity to do. And it's also really nice as a DJ because when you're DJing out for a party or a club environment, you really want to keep those people attentive, and you really want to keep them interested in having fun and being very active on the dance floor. That should really be, I think, every DJ's goal. But in that context, when you're on the radio, you really have a ton of freedom. You can experiment, you can play ambient music, you can play completely non-rhythmic music, you can play stuff that's just completely off the wall, and it's totally fine because people are often listening in their cars, they're listening in the background mode as they're doing work or getting ready to go out on that Friday night. So it's a great opportunity as a DJ to really explore other styles outside of four on the floor, true dance music. So 2015, I think, was, in my opinion, a year where there were some significant changes in the dance music scene in Tucson for the better. And what happened then was related to, oh, sorry, how do I want to word this? So in 2015, a pretty key thing happened that I think was influential on the scene in Tucson. And that was myself and my colleague Elio Sotoscritti. We started the night Chateau Disco. And that was an event at the Flycatcher that was a monthly club night based around deep house and techno and tech house. And so he and I partnered on that for a few months. We eventually went our separate ways, and Elio and some other people went on to found Dazed and Confused. And for a while, in early 2016, both Chateau Disco and Dazed and Confused were both active and giving people some really high quality options to go out, see pretty large and successful DJs that Dazed and Confused was bringing, as well as great local DJs. And at Chateau Disco, we focused on local DJs, giving them a chance to perform in a more professional kind of environment. So I think that raised the bar for people that were throwing events for different promoters and organizers as well as DJs. And I think the legacy, which Dazed and Confused is still going on and still very successful. I think they're really one of the most successful groups that's been able to have some staying power in this town, which is really tough to do from what I've seen. So from that point on, I think there was sort of a new standard, and they're continuing to give really nice options. They're bringing in top talent from around the world. They're promoting local DJs as well. And I think from that point on, there was sort of a new demand for sort of world-class quality. I think because the town is fairly small, and because so much of its population that goes out are college age, who the styles that they listen to, if I want to be more general, typically don't lean more towards underground styles. They typically discover more underground styles as they get a little bit older, after they've explored different layers of what they've been into. And I think, Dazed, for example, is a great example of how that happens, because they're able to bring in, a lot of younger people, a lot of college-age people, and then they discover deep house and techno, and many of them become fans. Some of them are just there for a party, but it helps to educate. The problem is a lot of those people go on to leave town and then go start a career somewhere, or just move elsewhere. And I just don't think that there's really enough of a population of people that stay put and really love being here and want to get involved in helping make that really thriving scene happen. Another thing too is that there is, let's see, I don't really think there's a lot of collaboration between groups that put on events. So a lot of people are operating in their own, not bubbles, but not in as much collaboration as they could be. And so people, which this happened to me, can burn out and just really want to take less of a role and just kind of be more, of an observer and enjoyer of what other people are creating. Or, in my case, I'm more focused on the radio aspect, which is a really nice, unique opportunity. But I just don't really have the endurance or the motivation to try to be a club night promoter and an event organizer, because it is a ton of work. And I think if there was a more thriving scene that was already a little bit more established, you could bring in more friends and you can have other people help take some of that weight off. And I think steps are being made in that direction, and that's part of why Dazed is so successful, is because they do have a large crew and a big network of friends and people that help out. And that's part of why Good Vibe Get Down, I think, is going to be successful, because they have a very similar network of really good people. But it just takes time for that to grow and reach a certain critical mass, and I think we're still a little bit away from that happening. It's just the way it is. I mean, to be fair, the economic opportunities in Tucson are not great. A lot of people are struggling to find gainful employment here, and that's a big part of it. Look at the cities where techno is thriving, like Berlin, for example. Plenty of great, jobs there, great benefits there. Job market's a lot better in Pacific Northwest. There's a lot of great scenes there. Seattle, Vancouver have some great house scenes. That's a big part of people being able to go out, be joyful, and spend money going out at a club, going out and dancing, celebrating. That's tied in with better overall success in life and your ability to be employed and not have to worry about where your next check's coming from, for example. So that's probably part of the equation of why Tucson has struggled with that, maybe more so than other cities. There are ups and downs to the size of the town and the scene, for sure. I mean, just the simple fact that it's a much smaller town means that the people that are involved have a chance to be more prominent than they would be in some huge scene like LA or Berlin. So, chances are I would never be able to be on an FM radio show if I lived in Berlin, probably. So I'm very thankful for that. And it is true to get the opportunity to have more of an impact in the place where you are. And that's a big reason why I've been very thankful that I've been able to be involved in the community in Tucson, really more than anywhere else I've ever lived. At the same time, though, the amount of, far-reaching impact you may have may not be as significant, just because you're probably playing to the same few hundred people or the same few hundred, maybe a few thousand listeners on the radio if you're lucky, with some change here and there and things come and go, but the overall hub, the overall nucleus is pretty small. It seems like another cycle is about to start, and these cycles, from what I've seen in the time that I've been here, tend to be around 4 to 5 years. And they sort of start with these small pockets of interesting things happening with, maybe some interconnected people, but often with different priorities, different styles, different groups of friends that are sort of their hub of attendance, that the successful ones start to grow, and they eventually reach a point where they sort of change up their format and strive to reach something bigger. And once they do, with your example as Dazed, they sort of come out very successful, sometimes more underground focused, but eventually just the fact that people here, they get bored, and then they start looking for new options, and then the big dogs start to dwindle and new pockets start to form again, and the cycle repeats. So maybe we're on the cusp of something like that. I'm not as active, really, not active at all on social media, so I don't see a lot of the chatter anymore, and kind of purposefully so. So I'm not as clued in as to what's going on there, but it's awesome that different venues and places that haven't been, known for having dance parties now are, and new people are getting involved, because that new blood is what keeps the scene alive, And that's a lot of what happens too, is that, people will be very heavily involved for, you know, certain amount of time, few years, maybe some more than others, and then they eventually check out, and then a new guard comes in, and you know that happened a couple years ago, and you know I got out, for example, other people got in, and that's going to keep happening. So that all coincides with this growth, and that's part of what keeps the scene fun. It's part of what keeps Tucson. One of our goals when we started Chateau Disco, when Elliot and I were still working together, was we really wanted to kind of be more unifying and put an end to these little pockets of effort that maybe weren't having as big of an impact as they would if everything would be done together. And that's a nice idea. You know, it sounds really nice and democratic and utopian. The truth is people have different goals. You know, people may not always work well together or have, you know, good standing with certain venues. So it often, you know, turns out that you have these smaller events. And I think that may be part of just Tucson DNA for this type of scene, which is a good thing. You know, it prevents people from only having a few big options. I'm all for the, you know, the small, focused, you know, really underground stuff.